Welcome to Kevin Deal Photography, where I take you on my journey through photography. On today's episode, I'm going to show you how I set up my Fuji GFX 100S for photography. I'm pleased to announce the release of my Capture One and Lightroom presets, Metamorphic Portraits, The Sound of Silver, and Rangefinder. These are all available for purchase at my website. Go to kevindealphotography.com or check out a link in the description below. And now, on to today's episode. Welcome to today's episode. If you're not familiar with Kevin Deal Photography, we do gear reviews, tips, techniques, and tutorials, and sometimes we dive into film. If any of that sounds appealing to you, click the subscribe button below. So a lot of you who are watching this, who have Fuji GFX cameras, are professionals. You're very set in your ways and you understand how you want to program things. So this may not be the best episode for you unless you're just being curious and you want to see how I do things and maybe compare it to how you do things. But I would say this episode is definitely geared more toward a new Fuji GFX owner. And even though this is the GFX 100S, a lot of what I'm saying will translate over to the newer version of the 100S2, the 100II, the 50, the 50R. A lot of these programming functions and all that are exactly the same. You might just see some slight variances. So this may still be a helpful tutorial for you, so stick around. But first, let's talk about the philosophy of what makes a good camera in terms of button placement, button location, and how it helps you with your photography. So I want you to listen to today's episode thinking about the style of photography that you do, and then I'm going to show you how I do things as a portrait photographer, as somebody who shoots a little bit of street photography and occasionally landscapes. And then I want you to translate that to what you do. You may shoot exactly how I shoot, and this may be like the perfect episode for you, but you can think about, oh, well, maybe I'll reassign a different button to what Kevin says in this episode. So I'm going to show you first what makes a good camera layout, then we'll talk about how to assign the buttons, and then I'll tell you what I assign the buttons to. So in today's episode, you need to go to Menu, then you need to go to Setup, or the wrench icon, and Button Dial Setting. Then we will be going between Function Setting or Command Dial Settings in today's episode. It should also be noted that I work in manual mode, so if you work in aperture or shutter priority, your results may be a little different. Let's start with the command dial settings. A good camera layout, and most cameras follow this very good ergonomic take, which is that your front button is either your shutter speed, or if you come over from the world of Nikon, it ends up being your aperture. I am a Canon guy, so this is my shutter speed, and that's what I have it programmed to. And then when I push this button in, this dial in, it then becomes my ISO. When I move over to the back of the camera, this other control dial is my aperture. So my exposure triangle is either here or here. That is very convenient to get to. So as you can see, I have shutter speed and ISO assigned to the click of that front command dial. But on that third slot where I have it as none, you can assign it to aperture if you'd like to, but at that point, I feel like I'm scrolling through a menu as opposed to toggling between two settings. And I have aperture assigned to my rear command dial, so I find it to be redundant. So I actually leave that third slot assigned to none. But if you disagree with me and you want to assign it to aperture and have a three-way toggle, this is where you would do that. The secondary thing that makes the most sense to me as a portrait photographer is my autofocus. So I assign a lot of my buttons to autofocus, and that starts with this rear command dial that when I push it in, that is my area. I can go from single point, I can go to zone, I can go to wide tracking, or I can go to all tracking, all with the push of my thumb. It is very convenient, very fast when you're on the set and you're shooting and you don't want to think about your autofocus area. You can just dial it in really fast. Now let's move over to the assignment of buttons. I don't use back button focus anymore. I used to, but now I assign my front focus only, my half shutter press, and then I do focus lock on the back button, because I find that with Fuji GFX, unfortunately, the autofocus just kind of freaks out sometimes. So when I have autofocus locked in, I lock it in, and I want to have a button assigned to that. You have the 3-way toggle on this. On my Fuji X-H2, I actually have this assigned to a button, but you have your single, your continuous, and your manual focusing toggle, which is already built in. I then can adjust my focus points with the thumbstick. Nothing has changed there. I will say that my eye detect is very important to me because I do shoot portraiture. So I actually reassign this exposure compensation button to the eye and face detect, because I want it to track the subject's head, usually because I'm shooting portraiture. Obviously, if you shoot another genre, you may want to assign that to something else. White balance, even though I shoot in RAW, I like to get as much at the camera correct as possible. So I actually assign white balance to this button that is right behind my shutter release. The button behind that I actually have assigned to my preview exposure white balance toggle, and then turning that off. And the reason why is because as a portrait photographer, I often find myself in situations where I am shooting environmental portraits on location, where the exposure simulation is very important to have because I want to see what my exposure is going to look like. Then I also shoot in studio, and I need my rear screen to be as bright as possible. So I like to just have something that can toggle between that. And then also in the studio, sometimes I shoot continuous light versus strobes. So when I shoot continuous light, I want to make sure I can see what the exposure is going to look like. So I assign this rear button to my preview exposure. The AEL button, I reassign that to my film simulations. I shoot in RAW, but I want to get as much correct as at the camera as possible. And so I tend to choose a base film simulation as the direction I want to take my shoot in. I want as much vision executed at the camera as possible, so I have less work in post-production. That's part of the reason I shoot Fuji. So to do that, I feel like you need to dial in your film simulation first. And so that's so important. It necessitates, in my opinion, having an actual button assigned to it. Moving below that, your menu button is only assigned to menu. You cannot reassign it. Your display back is only assigned to display back. You can't reassign that. And the same goes for your playback, your drive, and your trash can buttons. However, your Q button you can reassign, but I don't recommend it, your quick menu, because I feel like those quick menu options that come up do more positive for you than reassigning it to something else. So if you're like, man, I'm all out of buttons to assign to, that kind of sucks, don't worry, there are 4 more things you can assign to, and that is swipes on the touchscreen. So when I swipe from right to left, that pulls up my leveler. That's what I have assigned there. When I swipe from down to up, that pulls up my histogram because I feel that to be quite important. When I swipe from left to right, that pulls up my flash function settings. And then when I swipe from top to bottom, that pulls up my shutter type, where I can swap between mechanical and electronic shutter. So there's some extra options there. I do find that the touch screens are kind of not great on the Fuji setup, but you may disagree with me. And so if you are looking for extra places to assign things to, your swipe gestures are there for you to do that. Moving over to the front, I do reassign this button between the performance boost frame rate priority, normal mode, AF priority normal, and low light. And the reason I do that is because I often find myself needing to prioritize different parts of the power of the camera so I can save battery life, or when I'm in the studio and I need that low light priority to happen, I can make it happen. So another thing to keep in mind is that when you do save all of this, you want to go over to your image quality area. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense for saving custom modes. You scroll down a few pages and then you go to edit, save custom setting. And there you can actually name your settings. So I have location portrait and studio portrait, and I have custom 3 and 4 open, but sometimes I like to shoot in 35mm mode, and I have that assigned to custom mode 6. And of course, if you shoot very different genres of photography, maybe you're shooting landscapes versus portraits, you may want to assign the custom buttons to different things. And that is why your edit, save custom setting is so important. You can simply recall these settings by turning the PASM dial on the top of your camera. Once again, you can recall up to 6 saved presets. One final pro tip is to utilize the My menu in your Fuji cameras, because if you are a follower of this channel, you've probably heard me preach ad nauseum about how terrible Fuji menus are. You have to go into sub-menus. You have to scroll down through several pages to get to commonly accessed items, and Fuji doesn't make them easy to find. So I highly recommend you register these items to the My menu. Things such as assigning custom shooting modes under image quality. That has nothing to do with image quality. So take it over to your My menu so you don't have to assign custom shooting modes ever again. And explore other parts of the camera and find things that you access often and put them in the My menu. So that does it for this episode. How do you set up your GFX camera? Tell me about that in the comments below. Obviously, this is just a basis for you to look at how I do things, and then you can apply it to how you do things. And so you don't have to copy what I'm doing. I'm not telling you how to do it or what to do. I'm just showing you how I do it, and then you can obviously translate it to how you do things. But if you like this channel, I humbly ask you to click the subscribe button below. And until next time, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.